Hello and welcome to Mystery, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today we delve into the fog-shrouded world of Sherlock Holmes with the sinister widow of Briar Gatehouse, a deadly Sherlock Holmes case. Settle in as Dr. John Watson recounts this chilling tale of deception and deduction. Chapter 1. The Veiled Visitor. It was a dreary autumn evening in the year 1892 when the singular case of the sinister widow of Briar Gatehouse first came to our attention at 221B Baker Street. The fog hung thick over London, wrapping the city in a shroud that muffled the clatter of hansom cabs and the distant cries of street vendors. I, Dr. John H. Watson, had just returned from attending to a patient in the East End, my coat damp with the pervasive mist, when I ascended the familiar 17 steps to our lodgings. The door to our sitting room stood ajar, and from within came the faint, acrid scent of Holmes's strongest shag tobacco, mingled with the sharper tang of chemical reagents. A low fire burned in the grate, its orange glow flickering across the cluttered mantelpiece. The unanswered correspondence pierced upon the jackknife, the violin in its open case, the Persian slipper stuffed with the day's remaining tobacco. Holmes himself lounged in the basket chair, long legs stretched toward the fender, his hawk-like profile silhouetted against the flames. He wore the mouse-colored dressing gown, and his thin, eager fingers were steepled beneath his chin in that attitude of intense concentration I had come to know so well. "Ah, Watson," he murmured without turning. "You bring with you the aroma of the Thames at low tide, a trace of iodoform and the faintest suggestion of Friar's balsam. A child with diphtheria in Whitechapel, I presume." I confess I was no longer astonished by such deductions. "A little girl of 7, I replied, hanging my hat and coat upon the peg. Her throat was closing. I performed an emergency intubation with a quill and a length of rubber tubing. She will live, thank God." Holmes gave a short, approving nod. "Capital work, my dear fellow. The world is the richer for one more pair of bright eyes." He reached for his pipe, filled it from the toe of the slipper, and struck a vesta. The flare of the match lit the lean, aquiline features for an instant, and I noticed the faint bruise of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. "And yet," he continued, exhaling a thin blue cloud, "your mind is not wholly upon the child. There is something else, something that has set your pulse a beat faster than usual." I laughed, though not without a touch of uneasiness. "You are incorrigible, Holmes. It is only that the streets were alive with whispers tonight. The newsboys are crying the latest atrocity in Limehouse, and every alley seems to echo with unseen footsteps. London feels restless." "Restless?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Or merely watchful? The city is a great beast, Watson, and tonight it senses a storm approaching. But come, warm yourself. Mrs. Hudson has left a decanter of the '84 port upon the sideboard. One glass will not impair your professional dignity." I had scarcely poured the ruby liquid when there came a sharp, imperative knock at the street door. 3 measured raps, deliberate, neither timid nor insolent. Mrs. Hudson's step sounded upon the stair slower than usual, as though she carried a burden of apprehension. The sitting-room door opened, and our worthy landlady appeared, her kindly face pale beneath her lace cap. "Gentlemen," she said in a hushed voice, "there is a lady below. She would not give her name, only that her business is of the utmost urgency and that she must see Mr. Sherlock Holmes at once. She is veiled, and forgive me, I do not like the look of her. There is something tragic about her bearing." Holmes sprang from his chair with the lithe energy of a hound scenting the trail. "Tragic, Mrs. Hudson, excellent. Show her up immediately. Watson, the port may wait. Destiny knocks, and she is veiled in black." Mrs. Hudson hesitated, then bobbed a curtsy and withdrew. A moment later the door opened again and the visitor entered. She was tall, and the heavy morning gown of lustrous silk rustled softly as she moved. A thick veil of crepe concealed her features entirely, falling from the brim of a widow's bonnet to the high collar of her bodice. Black kid gloves encased slender hands that trembled faintly, and upon her left arm she carried a small reticule of jet beads. The gaslight caught the sheen of the fabric and threw back no reflection from the veil. It was as though a fragment of the night itself had stepped into our room. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice was low, cultivated yet threaded with strain, as though every word cost her an effort. Holmes inclined his head with that grave courtesy he reserved for women in distress. "At your service, madam. Pray be seated. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whose discretion you may place absolute confidence. You may speak freely." She hesitated upon the threshold, one gloved hand upon the jamb as if gathering courage. Then, with a gesture both proud and pitiful, she crossed to the chair Holmes indicated, the one opposite his own, and sank into it. The crepe rustled again, and I caught the faint scent of verbena mingled with the sharper note of grief. For a long moment silence reigned, broken only by the ticking of the ormolu clock upon the mantel and the occasional hiss of a coal in the grate. At length she raised her hands, slowly, as though the gesture were a confession, and lifted the veil. I confess I drew in my breath sharply. The face revealed was one of striking beauty, yet it bore the marks of profound suffering. The skin was pale as alabaster, the cheekbones high and delicate, the mouth full but compressed with sorrow. But it was the eyes that held me, large, dark, lustrous, and brimming with a terror she struggled to conceal. They were the eyes of a creature hunted, yet not without a spark of defiance. "Forgive the mystery of my arrival," she began, her voice steadier now. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, widow of the late Sir Reginald Hargrove of Briar Gatehouse. 2 months ago my husband died, poisoned," the coroner declared. "The verdict was misadventure, but I know better. I have come to beg your aid, Mr. Holmes, for I believe the hand that struck him down is now raised against me." Holmes leaned forward, his whole attitude one of rapt attention. "Poisoned, you say? Pray continue, madam. Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." Mrs. Hargrove clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Briar Gatehouse lies upon the edge of the moor some 12 miles beyond the city, a great rambling place built in the last century, surrounded by gardens that run wild to the heather. My husband inherited it from his father, together with a fortune made in the import of Oriental curiosities, silks, jade, spices, and rarer things still. He was a man of energy and ambition, much given to travel. We had been married 3 years. She paused, and I noticed the knuckles whiten beneath the gloves. On the evening of the 23rd of August, Sir Reginald returned from a journey to Southampton, where he had inspected a cargo newly arrived from Canton. He was in high spirits, speaking of a consignment of priceless porcelains. We dined alone. The staff had been given the evening off at his insistence, for he wished to discuss business matters privately. The meal was simple: soup, a saddle of mutton, and a decanter of port which he himself fetched from the cellar. It was while raising the first glass to his lips that the attack came. He gasped, clutched at his throat, and fell forward across the table. His face, God forgive me, I see it still, contorted in agony, the veins standing out like cords. I screamed for help, but by the time the gardener and butler broke in, he was gone. The doctor arrived within the hour and pronounced arsenic poisoning. The decanter was found to contain a lethal dose. Holmes's eyes had narrowed to slits. And the post-mortem? Confirmed arsenic in the stomach and traces in the port. The police searched the house and grounds. They discovered a packet of the poison in the gardener's shed, labeled for rat bait. and concluded that it had been introduced accidentally, perhaps by a careless servant. The inquest returned a verdict of misadventure. But Mr. Holmes, I know it was murder. Here her voice broke and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Reginald had enemies. His success bred envy. There were rivals in the trade, men who would stop at nothing to ruin him. And then there were whispers in the house itself, footsteps in corridors where no one walked, doors opening and closing of their own accord. A week after the funeral, my maid found a sprig of yew, symbol of death, laid upon my pillow. And only last Tuesday, a vial containing a white powder was discovered beneath my own dressing table. The police laugh and speak of hysteria. But I have seen a figure in the garden at midnight, a tall man in a cloak watching the windows. I am in terror of my life. Holmes had listened without movement save for the occasional tap of his fingers upon the arm of his chair. Now he spoke, his voice calm yet vibrant with interest. You mentioned business matters discussed at dinner. Were these of a confidential nature? Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. Reginald spoke of a partnership he intended to dissolve. A man named Victor Langford, his nephew and former heir, had been pressing for a larger share in the firm. There was anger, harsh words. Victor left the house that very afternoon, vowing never to return. Yet his glove was found in the shrubbery 2 nights ago, and footprints beneath my window match his boots. Indeed, Holmes murmured. And the staff? Their loyalty? Graves, the butler, served the family for 20 years. Eliza, the housemaid, is a simple girl from the village. Thorn, the gardener, is old and surly but devoted to the grounds. None had reason to harm my husband, save perhaps opportunity. Holmes rose and paced the room, his dressing gown swirling about his lean form. Opportunity is the least part of murder, madam. Motive, method, and the concealment of evidence. These are the trinity we must unravel. Tell me, had Sir Reginald any peculiarities of habit? Did he lock his study, keep private papers? The study was his sanctum. He carried the only key upon his watch chain. After his death, I found it locked still. The police forced it open and discovered nothing but ledgers and samples of spice. Yet I am certain he kept other documents, letters perhaps that would explain much. Holmes stopped before the fireplace, staring into the flames. One final point. You are the sole beneficiary of the estate? A flush rose to her pale cheeks. Yes. The will was made shortly after our marriage. Victor was cut off entirely following a quarrel over a woman in London. The scandal was hushed, but the breach was complete. I could not restrain myself. Madam, forgive me, but the circumstances are black against you. A young wife, a rich husband dead by poison, a fortune inherited. Society will whisper. Her eyes flashed. Let them whisper. I loved my husband, Dr. Watson. Ours was no marriage of convenience. If I am suspected, it is by those who covet what is now mine. I have come to Mr. Holmes because I believe he can prove my innocence and unmask the true murderer before he strikes again. Holmes turned, his face alight with that eager look I knew heralded the chase. Mrs. Hargrove, you have done wisely. The case presents features of the deepest interest. Watson, what say you? Shall we venture into the mists of Briar Gate and beard the lion in his den? I set down my untouched glass. I am with you, Holmes. The lady's distress is genuine and the medical aspects intrigue me. Arsenic is a cowardly poison, but its administration requires cunning. Holmes rubbed his hands together. Excellent. Madam, we shall accompany you to Briar Gate tomorrow. Pack nothing that cannot be carried in a single portmanteau. We travel light and swiftly. In the meantime, return to your hotel. Mrs. Hudson will call a cab and lock your door. Admit no one until we arrive. Here is my card. Send a telegram if anything alarms you. Mrs. Hargrove rose, the veil descending once more like a curtain upon her tragedy. "You give me hope, Mr. Holmes. God bless you both." She pressed a small sealed envelope into his hand. "My address and a retainer. I am not without means." The door closed behind her, and the room seemed suddenly larger, the fire brighter. Holmes stood motionless, the envelope unopened between his fingers. "Well, Watson," he said at last, "what do you make of our veiled visitor?" "A beautiful woman in genuine terror," I replied. "Yet the facts are damning. The poison in her husband's glass, the inheritance, the quarrelsome nephew. Motive enough for any court." Holmes smiled grimly. "Precisely why the truth lies elsewhere. Mark my words, Watson. The poison was administered with intent, but not by the widow. The sprig of yew, the vial beneath the dressing table, the midnight watcher, these are the flourishes of a dramatist, not a loving wife. No, our murderer is an artist in misdirection, and Briar Gatehouse conceals secrets deeper than any grave." He tossed the envelope onto the table unopened. "But come, we have work tonight. Pass me the railway guide and the ordnance map of the southern counties. By breakfast we must know every road, every train, every hiding place within 10 miles of Briar Gate. The game, my dear Watson, is afoot." Outside, the fog pressed against the window panes like a living thing, and somewhere in its depths a church bell tolled the hour. Little did I know, as I bent over the maps beside Holmes's eager form, that we were upon the threshold of a mystery as dark and tangled as the moor itself, a mystery that would tax even the genius of Sherlock Holmes to its utmost, and reveal passions blacker than the London night. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The morning of the 29th of October broke gray and sullen, with a wind that rattled the window panes of 221B Baker Street and sent the last withered leaves of the plane trees skittering along the pavement. Sherlock Holmes had been up since before the milk, and when I descended I found him at the breakfast table, a railway timetable open beside his plate, a half-consumed cup of black coffee cooling at his elbow. The fire was already blazing, for the air carried the bite of coming winter, and Mrs. Hudson had laid out a modest repast: eggs, deviled kidneys, toast, and a calm pot of marmalade. Holmes greeted me with a nod. "The 9:17 from Waterloo reaches Lower Briar Gate at 10:42 with a dog cart to meet us at the station. Mrs. Hargrove's telegram arrived an hour ago. Nothing amiss overnight, but she is anxious. Eat heartily, Watson. We shall need our strength." I obeyed, though my thoughts were already upon the moors. While I buttered toast, Holmes unfolded a large-scale ordnance map across the cloth, weighting the corners with a salt cellar and the marmalade jar. "Observe," he said, tracing a line with a lean forefinger. "Briar Gatehouse stands here, 3 miles from the village, upon a spur of the moor. The London road skirts it to the north. To the south lies open heath, intersected by old peat cuttings and a disused mineral railway. The house itself is late Georgian, built upon the foundations of an earlier manor. Note the walled garden, the stable block, and, this is significant, the ice house, half ruined at the edge of the shrubbery." I studied the map. Isolated yet not inaccessible. A man might approach unseen across the moor. Precisely, and depart the same way. The nearest telegraph is in the village post office, the nearest constable 5 miles distant at Upper Briar. Our murderer, Watson, enjoys both privacy and time. He folded the map with a snap. "Come, our cab awaits." We traveled light. Holmes with his ear-flapped traveling cap and a small valise containing his lens, tape measure, and a revolver. I with my service pistol and a medical case. The train was sparsely populated, a clergyman buried in the Times, 2 commercial travelers playing cards, and a nursemaid with a fretful child. Holmes sat opposite me, eyes half closed, yet I knew his mind was racing. At each station he noted the passengers who boarded or alighted, and once, as we passed a siding where a goods train waited, he leaned forward to study the wagons. "Opium?" he murmured. "See the stencilings, Canton to London via Southampton. Sir Reginald's last cargo, perhaps." The journey took us through the orderly suburbs, then into the wilder country where hedgerows gave way to stone walls and the hills rose in folds of russet and purple. At Lower Briar Gate we found a dog-cart drawn by a sturdy cob and a groom in a frayed coat who touched his cap. "Mrs. Hargrove's orders, sirs. Name's Jem. Stable lad. House is ready for you." The road climbed steadily, winding between banks of gorse and bracken. Fog lingered in the hollows, curling like smoke, and the air smelled of peat and damp earth. At length the gates of Briar Gate appeared, tall ironwork, surmounted by a crest of entwined briars, the paint blistered and the hinges rusted. The drive beyond was overgrown with laurel and rhododendron, their dark leaves glistening with moisture. Then the house itself came into view, and I confess the sight stirred something primal within me. Briar Gatehouse was larger than I had pictured, 3 stories of mellowed brick with a slate roof and a central pediment supported by slender columns. Ivy clung to the walls in great swaths, and the windows, many of them shuttered, stared blankly across the moor. A single chimney emitted a thin plume of smoke, quickly dissipated by the wind. The whole edifice seemed to brood as though conscious of the tragedy enacted within its walls. Mrs. Hargrove awaited us on the steps, dressed in dove-gray rather than black, a concession to the daylight hours. Her face was composed, yet the strain about her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. "Gentlemen," she said, extending a hand, "you are most welcome. I have dismissed the indoor staff for the morning, save Graves the butler, who will show you the house. The fewer ears, the better." Holmes bowed over her hand. "Wise precaution, madam. Lead on." The hall was spacious, floored with black and white marble and lit by a single gas chandelier that hissed softly. Portraits of former Hargroves glowered from the paneled walls. Bewigged gentlemen in velvet, ladies in hoops and powder. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly, and the air carried the scent of beeswax and old wood. Graves, the butler, was a tall, spare man of 60 with iron-gray hair and a face as expressionless as a mask. His livery was immaculate, yet there was something in his stance, a watchfulness that caught Holmes's attention. "Graves," said Mrs. Hargrove, "conduct Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson wherever they wish to go. Answer their questions fully." "Very good, ma'am." The voice was deep, deferential, yet I detected a faint tremor. Holmes wasted no time. "The dining room first, if you please." We were led down a short corridor to a room at the rear of the house overlooking the garden. It was paneled in oak, with a long table capable of seating 20, though only 2 places were laid at one end. A massive sideboard of carved mahogany dominated one wall. Upon it stood the fateful decanter, sealed now with red wax and labeled by the police. The windows were hung with heavy brocade, and a portrait of Sir Reginald, florid, prosperous, with a watch chain thick as a cable, hung above the mantel. Holmes moved like a bloodhound. He examined the table, the chairs, the carpet. He sniffed the decanter, then held it to the light. Crystal cut in the bohemian fashion. Note the slight clouding at the base. Arsenic residue precipitated over time. The cork shows signs of having been drawn and replaced several times. Curious. He knelt, lens in hand, and scrutinized the sideboard. Here, a faint white powder in the grain of the wood, and upon the floor beneath, scratches as though something heavy was dragged. I bent to look. The decanter stand, perhaps? Too light. No, observe the direction. From the door to the sideboard, then to the window, something was brought in, then removed. He straightened. Graves, on the night of the murder, who decanted the port, Sir Reginald himself, sir. He always chose the vintage. I carried the bottle from the cellar, uncorked it in the pantry, and left it upon the tray. He poured in here. And the tray? Still in the pantry, sir. The police examined it. Holmes's eyes gleamed. We shall see. Now the study. The study lay at the end of the west wing, a smaller room lined with books and glass-fronted cabinets displaying oriental curios. A jade Buddha, a lacquered screen, a samurai sword in a sheath of shark skin. The desk was massive, littered with papers, inkstand, and a bronze elephant. A safe stood in one corner, its door ajar. Holmes pounced upon the desk, rifling drawers with practiced speed. Ledgers, bills of lading, correspondence with factors in Hong Kong and Calcutta. Ah, what have we here? He drew forth a small ebony box, locked. From his pocket he produced a ring of skeleton keys, and in a moment the lid clicked open. Inside lay 6 glass vials, each stoppered and labeled in a spidery hand. Strychnine, cyanide, aconite, and 3 marked simply arsenic, vermin. Convenient, Holmes murmured. And yet the police found no fingerprints upon these save Sir Reginald's own. Curiouser and curiouser, he turned to Graves. Who had access to this room? Only Sir Reginald, sir. He kept the key upon his watch chain. After his death, Mrs. Hargrove had the locksmith force the door. Mrs. Hargrove, who had followed us, added softly, I never entered this room during his life. He was most particular. Holmes locked the box and pocketed the key. We shall return to this. Now the cellars. The cellars were reached by a stone stair behind a green baize door. They were extensive, vaulted, and lit by a single gas jet that flickered over racks of dusty bottles and crates stamped with Chinese characters. The air was cold and damp, smelling of earth and wine. Holmes moved methodically, tapping walls, examining floors. In one corner he discovered a pile of sacking. Beneath it lay a small iron-bound chest. The lock was new. Graves, what is this? The butler hesitated. Sir Reginald's private stock, sir. Rare brandies and such. He changed the lock himself a fortnight before the end. Holmes produced his keys again, but this lock resisted. Watson, your shoulder. Together we forced the lid. Inside were not brandies, but ledgers bound in red morocco, and bundles of letters tied with tape. Holmes lifted one ledger, turned to a marked page, and whistled softly. Opium, Watson. Quantities sufficient to supply half the dens in Limehouse. And here, payments to a certain SC in Soho. Blackmail or partnership. Mrs. Hargrove paled. Reginald swore he had given up the trade years ago. He said it was all legitimate now. Men say many things, Holmes replied gently. Graves, you knew of this chest? The butler's mask slipped for an instant. I saw fear in his eyes. I carried crates down at Sir Reginald's order, sir. I never looked inside. Holmes closed the chest. We shall reserve judgment. Now, the garden. We emerged into the daylight through a side door. The garden was a wilderness of overgrown roses and unkempt yew hedges, the paths choked with weeds. A sundial stood at the center, its gnomon bent. Beyond lay the moor, rolling away to a horizon lost in mist. Holmes strode to the spot beneath the dining room window, where the lawn was scarred by recent footprints. Size 10 as Mrs. Hargrove described, the notch on the left heel, distinctive, and here, he pointed to a patch of softer earth, a second set smaller, overlapping. A woman's shoe, I fancy. The plot thickens. He moved on to the ice house, a domed brick structure half sunk into the ground. The door hung ajar on broken hinges. Inside, the air was frigid. Frost glittered on the walls. Holmes lit a bullseye lantern and played the beam across the floor. Disturbed straw, and here, blood. Not much, but fresh within the week. He scraped a sample into a vial. Human, I shouldn't wonder. Mrs. Hargrove shuddered. The gardener uses it for storage. No one has entered since summer. Holmes emerged, eyes alight. Someone has, and recently. Graves, fetch the gardener. Thorn, I believe. The old man was found in his bothy, a stooped figure with a clay pipe and a face like walnut. His hands were earth-stained, his boots caked with mud. Holmes confronted him without preamble. Thorn, you were here the night Sir Reginald died? Aye, sir. Heard the mistress scream, ran to the house, too late. And these footprints beneath the window. Thorn squinted. Foxes, maybe, or poachers. Moors full of 'em. Holmes smiled thinly. Foxes do not wear hobnailed boots, nor leave blood in ice-houses. You will remain within call, Thorn. Dr. Watson and I have further questions. As we returned to the house, the wind freshened, driving clouds across the sun. Mrs. Hargrove led us to the drawing room, where tea was laid upon a low table. The room was feminine, with chintz curtains and a harp in the corner, but the atmosphere was heavy. Holmes declined tea and paced before the fireplace. Recapitulate, Watson, he said suddenly. The known facts. I ticked them off on my fingers. Sir Reginald poisoned by arsenic in his port. The decanter tampered with in the dining room. Poison kept in the study, secret opium trade, blackmail or partnership with SC, footprints, blood, a woman's shoe print. The ice house disturbed. Holmes nodded. And the unknown. Who introduced the arsenic? Who benefits? Who watches the house? Mrs. Hargrove, you mentioned your husband's nephew, Victor Langford. When did he last visit? 3 days before the murder. They quarreled violently in this very room. Victor stormed out, vowing vengeance. Describe him. Tall, well-built, fair hair, a small scar on the left cheek from a fencing accident. He favors loud checks and a gold-headed cane. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The footprints are size 10. Langford's size? I believe so. Then we must speak with Mr. Langford. Graves, send a telegram to his London club, the Diogenes, and another to Scotland Yard. I require Inspector Lestrade's notes on the inquest. He turned to our client. Madam, you will dine with us tonight. Afterwards, Dr. Watson and I will keep watch. The house is under siege, and tonight the enemy may show his hand. Mrs. Hargrove inclined her head. I place myself in your hands, Mr. Holmes. The afternoon waned. I examined the pantry tray, plain silver, no hidden compartments. Holmes disappeared into the study with the red ledgers, emerging only to demand ink, paper, and a magnifying glass. At 5 o'clock, the groom brought word that Victor Langford had been located at his rooms in Half Moon Street and would arrive by the last train. Dinner was a tense affair. The great table was set for 4. Mrs. Hargrove at the head, Holmes and I flanking her, Graves serving in silence. The gasoliers were turned low and shadows lurked in the corners. Conversation was sparse. The clink of cutlery sounded unnaturally loud. Once a draft stirred the curtains and Mrs. Hargrove started violently. Only the wind, I reassured her, though my own nerves were taut. At 9, the dog cart rattled into the courtyard and Victor Langford strode in, tall, arrogant, the scar livid against his pale skin. His eyes flicked over us with disdain. So the great Sherlock Holmes condescends to meddle in family affairs. Aunt Eleanor, this is absurd. Uncle Reginald died by misadventure, as the coroner said. Holmes regarded him coolly. Mr. Langford, your uncle was murdered. The question is by whom and for what? You quarreled 3 days before his death. You were disinherited. You have been seen lurking in the garden. Explain. Langford flushed. I quarreled, yes, over money. Uncle was a tyrant. But murder? I was in London the night he died. Ask my club steward. Your alibi will be checked. Meanwhile, your glove was found in the shrubbery. Your footprints beneath the window. Planted. Someone wishes to discredit me. Holmes smiled. We shall see. You will remain here tonight under my eye. Langford opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. Very well. But mark this, Mr. Holmes. I am innocent, and I'll prove it. The house settled into night. Graves locked and bolted the doors. The maids retired to their attic. Holmes stationed me in the hall with a revolver and a whistle. He himself took the study door ajar. Mrs. Hargrove was persuaded to her room with a dose of bromide. The clock struck 11 midnight. The wind howled about the eaves, and somewhere a shutter banged. At 12:30 I heard it, a faint scraping at the dining room window. I crept forward, heart pounding. Through the gap in the curtains I saw a figure, cloaked and hooded, working at the catch with a knife. I raised the whistle to my lips, then a hand clamped over my mouth, and Holmes's voice whispered in my ear. Steady, Watson, let him enter, we have him. The window opened, the figure slipped inside. Moonlight glinted on steel. Holmes sprang, and I followed. There was a brief struggle. Then the cloak fell away, revealing not Langford, not Thorn, but Graves the butler. His face twisted with desperation, a phial of white powder in his hand. Arsenic, Holmes said triumphantly, pinning the man's arms. For the widow's tea, no doubt. The game is up, Graves. The butler sagged. It was for the master first. He threatened to dismiss me, expose my thefts. I had no choice. Holmes bound him with curtain cord. You will tell the rest to Lestrade. Watson, rouse the household. The shadows lengthen, but dawn approaches. As the first pale light crept over the moor, I stood with Holmes in the garden, watching the mist lift from the heather. The house behind us seemed less oppressive, as though a poison had been drawn from its veins. Yet Holmes's face was grave. One thread unravels, he said, but the tapestry remains incomplete. Graves poisoned the port, yes, but who prompted him? Who watches still? The game, Watson, is far from played out. And as the sun rose blood-red above the hills, I knew that the shadows of Briar Gatehouse had only begun to stir. Chapter 3. The House on the Moor. The dawn that followed Graves' capture was one of the most desolate I have ever witnessed. A thin, cold rain slanted across the moor, turning the heather to a sodden purple and filling the air with the scent of peat and decay. Briar Gatehouse stood gaunt against the sky, its windows streaming like tears. Holmes and I had passed the remainder of the night in the dining room, Graves bound to a chair and watched in turns, while Mrs. Hargrove, pale but composed, sat wrapped in a shawl by the fire. The butler had lapsed into sullen silence after his first outburst, refusing to say more until the proper authorities arrived. Holmes, however, was in his element, pacing the turkey carpet with the restless energy of a terrier at a rat-hole. At 7 o'clock, the dog cart returned from the station, bringing not Inspector Lestrade, for he was engaged upon a trunk murder in Whitechapel, but a stolid local sergeant named Bray, accompanied by 2 constables. Bray was a thick-set man with a mustache like a yard brush and the deliberate manner of one who has never hurried in his life. He listened to Holmes's summary, scratched his head, and declared that the prisoner must be conveyed to the county jail at once. Attempted murder is a hanging matter, he said, and the inquest can be reopened. But Mr. Holmes, sir, are you certain this is the whole of it? The lady's life still in danger, you say? Holmes's reply was curt. Certain of Graves' guilt in the poisoning? Yes. Certain that he acted alone? No. There are footprints, blood in the icehouse, and a watcher upon the moor who has not yet shown his hand. Keep a man on guard here, Sergeant, and telegraph Scotland Yard for Lestrade. Dr. Watson and I have work upon the heath. Mrs. Hargrove, who had followed the proceedings with wide eyes, laid a hand upon Holmes's sleeve. You will not leave me, Mr. Holmes. After last night, Madam, he said gently, your safety is my first concern. One constable will remain within call, and Dr. Watson's revolver is a match for any midnight visitor. We shall return before dusk. In the meantime, lock every door and admit no one save Sergeant Bray. We breakfasted hastily, coffee and cold beef, while the rain drummed upon the windows. Holmes donned his ear-flapped cap and ulster. I followed suit, adding a muffler against the wind. The sergeant's men removed Graves, still silent, his irons clinking as he descended the steps. Victor Langford, who had been roused from his room, watched the departure with a scowl. "So the butler did it," he sneered. "I told you I was innocent. May I now return to London?" Holmes fixed him with a cold stare. "You may not. Your alibi for the night of the murder is unverified, and your glove was found upon the premises. You will remain until Lestrade arrives. Consider it a precaution." Langford opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it and stamped off to the library. Holmes watched him go, a speculative gleam in his eye. "Come, Watson," he said. "The moor awaits." We left by the garden door, stepping into a world of gray mist and dripping gorse. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the ground was treacherous, black peat that sucked at our boots and sent runnels of water across the path. Holmes carried his lantern, though the light was scarcely needed. The moor stretched away in every direction, a vast undulating sea of brown and purple, broken only by outcrops of granite and the occasional stunted oak. A curlew cried overhead, its mournful note echoing our mood. Holmes led the way with the sureness of a man born to wild places. He followed the line of footprints we had noted the previous day, those with the notched heel, which led from the dining room window toward a copse of birch and alder half a mile distant. The tracks were blurred by rain, but still discernible. "Observe," he said, kneeling. "The depth of impression. Our man is heavy, 12 stone at least, and he was running. See how the toe digs in. Yet here," he pointed to a patch of firmer ground, "a second set, lighter, overlapping. The woman again. They met here, parted, then rejoined." I looked about. The copse was dense, the ground carpeted with fallen leaves. Holmes moved methodically, parting branches, examining trunks. At length he gave a low exclamation and beckoned me to a hollow beneath a fallen log. There, half buried in moss, lay a leather glove, gentleman's tan kid, monogrammed VL in faded gold. "Langford's," I said triumphantly. "Or another's," Holmes replied. "Monograms are easily transferred, but note the tear at the thumb, fresh, and the stain upon the cuff. Blood, Watson, and not yet dry." He scraped a sample into a vial. "We progress." From the copse the tracks led onward, skirting a bog where the peat was black and treacherous. Holmes tested the ground with his stick, marking safe passage with scraps of white paper torn from his notebook. The mist thickened, swallowing sound. Even our footsteps were muffled. I felt the isolation press upon me, the knowledge that London with its crowds and gas lamps lay 30 miles away, and that upon this waste we were as alone as Crusoe upon his island. At length we reached the ruins of an old peat cutter's hut. 4 walls of crumbling stone, the roof long fallen in. Holmes entered, lantern raised. The interior was a chaos of broken crates and rusted tools. In one corner lay a pile of sacking, beneath it a small tin box. Holmes opened it with care. Inside were 3 items: a half-empty packet of arsenic, a folded map of the estate, and a woman's handkerchief edged with lace and marked E.H. "Mrs. Hargrove's," I murmured. Holmes's face was grim. "Or another's with the same initials. Eliza the maid, perhaps." "The plot thickens, Watson. And see here," he held the map to the light, "a cross in red ink, marking the ice house, and a dotted line to the mineral railway. Someone plans an escape, or an arrival." We emerged to find the mist lifting slightly, revealing the moor in all its desolation. Far to the south, a thin plume of smoke rose, the morning train upon the branch line. Holmes consulted his watch. 11 o'clock. We have time. Let us follow the railway. The line was disused, the sleepers rotten, and the rails furred with rust, yet the track bed offered firm footing. We walked for perhaps a mile, the wind at our backs, until we came upon a siding where a single goods wagon stood derelict. Its doors hung open. Inside, the floor was strewn with straw and the remnants of a fire. Holmes climbed aboard, lantern swinging. "Recent occupation," he said. "See the ashes, still warm, and here." He lifted a scrap of paper, a telegram form, blank but for the heading "London to Lower Briar Gate. Someone communicates with the outside world." I examined the wagon's exterior. Upon the paintwork, faintly scratched, were the initials S.C. "Silas Crow!" I exclaimed, recalling the name from the ledgers. "The rival trader." Holmes nodded. "The net widens, but come, we must return. The rain returns, and I would not have Mrs. Hargrove left longer than necessary." The homeward journey was swifter, for we followed our own tracks. As we neared the house, the clouds parted briefly, and a shaft of pale sunlight struck the moor, turning the wet heather to flame. Briar Gate loomed ahead, its chimneys smoking, a constable pacing the terrace. Mrs. Hargrove met us at the door, her face alight with relief. "You are safe. I have been in terror, and Mr. Langford, he has been pacing like a caged beast." Holmes removed his cap, shaking off the rain. "We are safe, madam, and bring news. But first, lunch. A man cannot deduce upon an empty stomach." We lunched in the morning room, cold pigeon pie and a bottle of claret, while Holmes recounted our discoveries, omitting nothing. Mrs. Hargrove listened in silence, her fingers clasped tightly about her glass. "The handkerchief is indeed mine," she said at length. "It vanished from my drawer a week ago, and the glove, Victor's beyond doubt. But the arsenic in the hut, who placed it there?" "That," said Holmes, "is what we must determine. Sergeant Bray has taken Graves to the jail. Lestrade arrives by the afternoon train. In the meantime, we interview the staff." Eliza the maid was summoned first. She was a slight girl of 19 with frightened eyes and a country accent. Under Holmes's gentle questioning, she admitted to walking upon the moor with her sweetheart, a shepherd lad, but denied knowledge of the hut or the poison. "I'd not touch such stuff, sir, not for the world. Mistress has been kind to me." Thorn the gardener was surlier. He admitted using the ice house for storing apples, but claimed no knowledge of blood or intruders. His boots, however, were size 10, and the left heel bore a deep notch where a nail had worked loose. Holmes examined them closely. "You walked beneath the dining-room window 2 nights ago, Thorn. The prints match." The old man's face darkened. "I heard a noise, went to look. Saw nothing. Maybe it was me, maybe not. Moor's full of tracks." Holmes let him go with a warning. "Remain within call, Thorn. Your movements interest me." The afternoon brought Lestrade, small, rat-faced, triumphant at being summoned to the country. He listened to Holmes's report with ill-concealed impatience, then examined Graves in the library. The butler, confronted with the evidence from the hut, broke down completely. "It was Langford's doing," he cried. "He paid me to poison the master, said he'd expose my thefts otherwise. The arsenic in the hut was his, planted to throw suspicion on the widow. I swear I acted alone in the dining room." Lestrade rubbed his hands. "There we have it, Mr. Holmes. Nephew and butler in collusion. Case closed." Holmes's smile was wintry. "Closed, Inspector?" "Hardly. Langford's alibi for the murder night holds 3 witnesses at his club, and the woman's footprints, the blood, the watcher upon the moor, these remain. No, the curtain rises upon the second act." Lestrade snorted. "Always complications with you, Holmes. I'll take Langford in for questioning, and we'll sweat the truth from him." "Do so," said Holmes, "but quietly. Dr. Watson and I keep watch tonight. The moor has not yielded all its secrets. Dusk fell early, the rain returning in earnest. The house was secured, every window latched, every door bolted. Lestrade departed with Langford in custody, leaving 2 constables on guard. Mrs. Hargrove retired early, sedated with laudanum. Holmes and I took up positions in the hall, Holmes with his pipe, I with my revolver and a copy of the Lancet to keep me awake. The clock struck 10, 11 midnight. The wind howled, rain lashed the panes. At 12:30, Holmes touched my arm. "Listen!" From the upper floor came a faint sound, a creaking as of a board giving way. We crept upstairs, lanterns shaded. The sound led to the master bedroom. The door stood ajar. Within, a figure knelt before the fireplace, prying at the hearthstone. Moonlight glinted on a scarred cheek. "Silas Crowe," I whispered. Holmes sprang. The man whirled, a knife flashing, but I was upon him, pinning his arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Crowe struggled like a trapped animal. "Bind him, Watson," Holmes directed. "We have our watcher." Crowe was a burly man in a seafarer's pea-jacket, his face a map of old fights. Bound to a chair, he glared defiance. "You'll get nothing from me, Holmes. Hargrove ruined me, stole my roots, my contacts. I came for my ledgers, nothing more." "And the blood in the ice house?" Holmes demanded. "A cut finger, that's all. I hid there when the constables came." Holmes examined the man's hands. No recent wounds. "Lies. You have been upon the moor for days, communicating by the railway siding. Who is your accomplice within the house?" Crowe spat. "Find him yourself." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, the hearthstone." Beneath it lay a small cavity, and within, a bundle of letters tied with red tape, and a second vial of arsenic. Holmes read one letter aloud. "My dear S. The deed is done. G has played his part. Meet me at the siding midnight Friday. The woman suspects nothing. V." "V," I exclaimed. "Not Victor, someone else." Holmes's eyes blazed. "Precisely. The web spreads wider than we thought. Crowe, you will remain here until morning. Watson, we have a rendezvous to keep." We left the prisoner under guard and slipped out into the night. The rain had ceased, leaving the moor glistening under a ragged moon. We followed the path to the railway siding, moving silently through the heather. At the wagon, we concealed ourselves and waited. The church clock in the village struck 12. A figure approached, cloaked, hooded, carrying a lantern. It paused at the wagon door, then entered. Holmes signaled. We crept forward. Inside, the figure bent over the ashes, adding fresh kindling. Holmes flung open the door. "Hands up! The game is ended." The figure whirled, lantern raised, and the hood fell back, revealing not a man but Eliza, the maid, her face white with terror. Mr. Holmes," she gasped, "I only came for my sweetheart's letter." Holmes seized her wrist. "Your sweetheart is Silas Crowe? Or another? Speak, girl, or face the gallows." She broke down, sobbing. "It was Mr. Victor, sir. He wrote the letters, paid Mr. Graves, planted the glove. He said if I helped, he'd marry me when he had the fortune. I never meant murder, only to frighten the mistress." Holmes's face was stern. "You have done enough. Watson, escort her to the house. The constables will take charge." As I led the weeping girl away, Holmes lingered by the wagon, examining the ashes. He straightened, holding a scrap of burnt paper. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said, "we return to London. The threads lead back to the city, and to a man who believes himself beyond reach. But first, one more cast upon the moor." The night was far advanced when we regained the house, the moon sinking behind the hills. Eliza was locked in her room under guard, Crowe in the cellar. Mrs. Hargrove, roused by the commotion, listened to our report with wondering eyes. "Then it was Victor all along?" Holmes shook his head. "A pawn, perhaps, but not the player. Sleep now, madam. Tomorrow brings clarity." I retired to my chamber, but sleep was long in coming. The wind moaned about the eaves, and in my dreams I saw the moor stretching endless and empty. A single figure walking its wastes, lanterns swinging forever beyond reach. Little did I know that the true heart of the mystery lay not upon the heath, but in the shadowed alleys of London, where the final act would be played beneath the glare of gas lamps and the clamor of hansom cabs. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Fog. The morning after Eliza's midnight confession found Briar Gatehouse wrapped in a fog so dense that the world beyond the windows ceased to exist. The moor had vanished. Even the nearest yew hedge was a blurred silhouette. The air inside was damp and chill, the fires struggling to take hold. Holmes stood at the breakfast room window, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the gray void as though it were a cipher he could decipher. "Visibility nil," he murmured. "Perfect cover for an escape or an approach. Watson, we return to London by the first train. Lestrade can hold the fort here." Mrs. Hargrove, pale but resolute, poured coffee with steady hands. "You believe the answers lie in the city?" "I believe the puppet master does." Eliza spoke of letters signed V, not Victor Langford, whose handwriting I have seen, but another. The ledgers mention S.C. Silas Crowe. Between them runs a thread we have not yet grasped. Graves, Eliza, Crowe, Langford, all pawns. The king remains hidden. Victor Langford himself, released from custody upon Eliza's confession, entered the room at that moment, his face a study in sullen triumph. "So the little maid was your culprit. I told you I was innocent." Holmes turned, eyes glittering. "Innocent of the murder, perhaps. Guilty of conspiracy, blackmail, and attempted fraud, most certainly. Your forged letters, your planted glove, your payments to Graves, these will occupy the courts for months. You will remain in Lestrade's care until then." Langford's bravado crumbled. "You cannot prove, I can and will. Sergeant Bray, remove this gentleman." The sergeant, who had lingered for breakfast, led Langford away. Mrs. Hargrove watched with compressed lips. "He was family," she said softly. "Blood proves nothing." "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Blood binds, but greed severs. Come, Watson. The dog-cart leaves in 20 minutes." We traveled light, the fog pursuing us to the station. The train emerged from the mist only as we boarded, its whistle a mournful cry. Holmes was silent for much of the journey, his long fingers drumming upon the windowsill. At Waterloo he dispatched telegrams, to the Diogenes Club, to Scotland Yard, to a certain chemical analyst in Lambeth, then hailed a hansom. "British Museum," he directed. "The Oriental Department. Time is short." The fog had followed us to London, thicker here, yellowed by smoke and coal dust. Gas lamps burned like corpse candles along the Strand. At the museum we were met by Dr. Forsyth, a stooped scholar with ink-stained fingers and a passion for Ming porcelain. "Mr. Holmes, your wire mentioned Sir Reginald Hargrove. A tragic business. How may I assist?" Holmes produced a list. These items were in Hargrove's last cargo from Canton: jade figurines, silk bolts, and, crucially, 3 sealed jars labeled medicinal powder. "Can you identify the substance?" Forsyth adjusted his spectacles. "Arsenic trioxide, almost certainly, used in traditional Chinese remedies for skin complaints, but in quantity, lethal. Hargrove imported it under license for vermin control, but the trade is rife with abuse. Rivals undercut him by smuggling pure opium. He retaliated with poisoned samples to ruin their reputation, a vicious circle. And a man named Silas Crowe? Crowe. Yes, scarred face, former partner of Hargrove's. Lost a fortune when a shipment was seized. Swore vengeance. Last seen in Limehouse, running a chandlery as cover for smuggling. Holmes thanked him and we departed. The fog was lifting slightly as we reached Baker Street, revealing the familiar facade of 221B. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with relief and a telegram from Lestrade. Graves confesses full. Langford paid him $500. Eliza innocent of poison, only letters. Crow escaped custody during transfer. Watch the river. Escaped, I exclaimed. The net closes, yet the fish slips through. Holmes's eyes blazed. Not for long. Watson, your revolver. We visit Limehouse. Night had fallen by the time our cab deposited us at the edge of the docks. The fog here was acrid, laced with tar and opium. Warehouses loomed like cliffs. The river lapped black and oily against the wharves. Holmes led the way to a narrow alley where a sign read, Crow and Son, Ship's Chandlers. The door was locked, but a side window yielded to his jemmy. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rope and lamp oil. A single gas jet burned. Holmes moved like a shadow, examining ledgers, opening drawers. In a back room, we found what we sought, a small office, its walls papered with shipping notices. Upon the desk lay a map of the Thames marked with red crosses, one at Briar Gate Wharf, another at a warehouse in Wapping. Smuggling routes, Holmes whispered. And here, he lifted a letter, the ink still wet, to V at the Golden Lotus Club, Soho. Meet tonight, midnight, final payment. The Golden Lotus was a notorious haunt of Oriental traders and European adventurers. We arrived at 11, the fog now a choking pall. The club was a cavern of smoke and low voices lit by paper lanterns. Holmes ordered tea and we waited. At midnight, a man entered, tall, cloaked, a scar livid across his cheek. Crow. He scanned the room, then approached a corner table where a slight figure in European dress sat hunched over a pipe. Holmes signaled. We moved. Crow saw us too late. My revolver pressed against his spine. Hands high, Crow. The game is up. He froze. The figure at the table rose, and the cloak fell away, revealing not a man but a woman, Eliza's sister Vera, dismissed years ago for theft. Vera, I gasped. Holmes bound Crow's wrists. The missing link. Vera, you forged the letters, planted the glove, paid Graves through Crow. But why? Vera's eyes were hard. Hargrove ruined my life. Dismissed me without reference, left me destitute. Crow promised revenge and a share of the inheritance. We framed the widow, used Langford's greed, Eliza's innocence. Graves was the tool. Crow snarled. You'll never prove it. Holmes smiled. I already have. The handwriting matches the ledgers, the arsenic in your chandlery, the blood in the ice house. Yours from a struggle with Thorn, who suspected. Lestrade waits outside. As the constables took them away, the fog began to lift, revealing the first stars. Back at Baker Street, Holmes poured brandy. One thread remains, he said. Thorn the gardener, he knew too much, vanished at dawn. Tomorrow we return to the moor. I raised my glass. To the king across the water. Holmes's eyes gleamed. To the final act. Chapter 5. The Poisoned Chalice. The morning train from Waterloo was crowded with city clerks and costermongers, yet Holmes and I secured a first-class compartment by the simple expedient of bribing the guard. The fog of London had thinned to a pale haze, but as we rattled southward, the sky lowered again, and by the time we reached Lower Briar Gate, a steady drizzle was falling. Sergeant Bray met us at the Asile de Noël station with a dog cart, his face grim beneath the dripping brim of his helmet. Glad you're back, Mr. Holmes. Thorn the gardener, he's gone. Slipped away before dawn. Left a note saying he'd had enough of the house and its secrets. Mrs. Hargrove is beside herself. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The note. Preserve it. And the ice house? Constable's been posted there since yesterday, no one in or out. We reached Briar Gate to find the house in uproar. Mrs. Hargrove met us in the hall, her face ashen. Mr. Holmes, I am poisoned. This morning's tea. Cramps, nausea, the same as Reginald. Dr. Watson, please. I examined her at once. Pulse rapid, pupils dilated, a metallic taste upon the tongue. Classic arsenical symptoms. I administered an emetic of mustard and warm water. She retched violently, then sank back, pale but breathing easier. A sample of the tea taken from her cup showed a faint white sediment when tested with silver nitrate. Arsenic again, I confirmed. A smaller dose than Sir Reginald's, but enough to kill within hours had it not been discovered. Holmes knelt by the tea tray, lens in hand. The sugar bowl. Fresh crystals added. See the uneven distribution. Someone entered the morning room after the tray was prepared. He turned to the maid who had brought it, Annie, a new girl replacing Eliza. Who was in the kitchen this morning? Only myself and cook, sir. Mrs. Hargrove rang at 8. I carried the tray straight up. Holmes's gaze swept the room. The sugar was tampered with here, then. Footprints? The carpet was thick. No prints showed, but upon the windowsill a faint smudge of mud. Holmes scraped it into an envelope. More soil, peat and clay, Thorn's boots or another's. Mrs. Hargrove, propped upon pillows, whispered, Thorn was devoted to the gardens. Why would he harm me? Devotion can turn to hatred, Holmes replied, or he serves another. Sergeant, the ice house, now. We crossed the sodden lawn to the domed brick structure. The constable on duty saluted. Quiet all night, sir. But this morning, he indicated fresh scratches upon the door. Someone tried to force the lock. Holmes examined the marks. A jemmy, clumsily used, and here, he pointed to the ground. Boot prints again, size 10, notched heel. Thorn returns to the scene of his crime. Inside, the air was colder than before. The straw was disturbed. In one corner lay a small tin box, newly placed. Holmes opened it carefully. Inside, a half-empty packet of arsenic, a folded note, and a single gold cufflink engraved with the Hargrove crest. The note read, The widow drinks at noon. Finish it. Payment at the siding tonight. V. V again, I said. But Vera is in custody. Holmes's face was grim. A Confederate, then. Or the true V remains free. Watson, your medical kit, tests the arsenic. I did so. It matched the residue in the sugar bowl. Holmes pocketed the note and cufflink. Thorn is the poisoner, but directed by another. We must find him before noon. We searched the grounds systematically. The rain had ceased, leaving the moor glistening. Holmes followed the boot prints from the ice house to the old mineral railway, where they vanished upon the gravel. He has a bicycle, Holmes deduced. See the narrow tire marks. He rides to the village, perhaps, or beyond. A shout from the constable brought us to the stable yard. There, half hidden beneath straw in an empty stall, lay Thorn's jacket, torn, blood-stained, and with a bullet hole through the shoulder. Someone shot at him, I said. And recently the blood is fresh. Holmes examined the wound pattern. A revolver, close range. Thorn surprised an intruder, was wounded, fled. But whose bullet? Mrs. Hargrove, recovered enough to join us, identified the cufflink. Reginald's. He kept a pair in his study safe. The other is missing. Holmes's eyes blazed. Then the murderer returns to the house. Sergeant, post men at every door. Watson, the study, now. The study door stood ajar. Inside, chaos. Drawers ransacked, the safe forced open. Upon the desk lay the mate to the cufflink, and a ledger open to a page marked Payments to V. Thorn, 200 quarterly. Beneath, in fresh ink, Final settlement tonight. Destroy this. Holmes seized the ledger. Thorn was Sir Reginald's pensioner, perhaps an old retainer, perhaps more. But the poisoner turns upon his paymaster. Watson, the noon bell approaches. Mrs. Hargrove must not drink again. We returned to the morning room. The tea tray had been cleared, but a fresh pot stood upon the sideboard. Holmes tested it, clean. Yet upon the sugar bowl a faint fingerprint in the crystals. "Thorns," he said. He returned, wounded, desperate. But where is he now? A groan from the garden answered us. We rushed out to find Thorn collapsed against the sundial, blood soaking his shirt. I knelt, staunching the wound, a clean through and through to the shoulder. "Hold still, man. Who shot you?" Thorn's eyes fluttered. "The master's brother thought I'd turn on him. Came for the ledger." Holmes leaned close. "Sir Reginald had a brother?" "Illegitimate, raised as gardener. Me. He promised me the estate if I... His voice failed. Mrs. Hargrove gasped. "You poisoned my husband, your own brother?" Thorn nodded weakly. "He cut me off, said I was nothing. V promised revenge." "V?" Holmes pressed. No, Victor's friend, Werner. Captain Werner from India. He supplied the arsenic, said it was for rats." Holmes straightened. "Captain Werner. V. The missing piece. Watson the siding. Tonight. Thorn, you live to testify. Sergeant, bind his wound and guard him." As the sun sank behind the moor, painting the sky blood red, we prepared for the final confrontation. The poisoned chalice had been raised, but the hand that held it was not yet stilled. The moor whispered its secrets, and somewhere in the gathering dark, Captain Werner waited with death in his pocket. Chapter 6. Hidden Alliances. The dusk that settled over Briar Gatehouse was the color of old blood. A low wind moaned across the moor, rattling the ivy against the windows and driving thin clouds like smoke before the moon. Holmes stood in the hall, lantern in hand, his face set in that mask of concentration I had seen before the most perilous undertakings. Mrs. Hargrove, still pale from the morning's ordeal, had been persuaded to retire under the watchful eye of Annie the maid and a constable. Thorn, bandaged and under guard in the butler's pantry, drifted in and out of fevered sleep. Holmes checked his revolver, then mine. "The siding at midnight, Watson. Captain Werner will come for his ledger and his payment. We shall be there to greet him." Sergeant Bray shifted uneasily. "2 of my men will accompany you, Mr. Holmes. The moor's no place for gentlemen on a night like this." Holmes smiled thinly. "Your men will watch the house, Sergeant. Dr. Watson and I work best alone. Post 1 at the ice house, another at the garden gate. If Werner slips the net, they must raise the alarm." We left at 10, cloaked and silent, following the gravel path to the mineral railway. The moon half-shrouded through uncertain light. Every gorse bush seemed a crouching figure. Holmes moved with the sureness of a cat, lantern shaded to a mere slit. The siding lay a mile distant, the derelict wagon a black bulk against the silvered heath. We concealed ourselves in a cutting beside the track, the damp earth cold beneath us. The wind carried the scent of rain and distant wood smoke. Holmes produced a small flask of brandy. We passed it in silence. The minutes crawled. At 11:30, the church clock in the village tolled, faint but clear. Holmes touched my arm. A light flickered far down the line, a bicycle lamp approaching steadily. The rider dismounted, propped the machine against the wagon, and climbed aboard. A match flared. In its brief glow, we saw a military figure, mustached, erect, a scar across the left temple. Captain Werner. He struck another match, consulting a pocket watch, then began scraping at the wagon floor with a knife. Holmes signaled. We rose and advanced, revolvers leveled. "Hands high, Captain Werner. The game is ended." The man whirled, knife flashing, but my bullet shattered the lantern and plunged us into darkness. There was a brief struggle. Holmes's stick cracked against bone, and Werner went down with a groan. I struck a light. The captain lay bound, his face livid with rage. "You meddle in matters beyond you, Holmes. he spat. "Hargrove ruined me in Calcutta. Court-martial, disgrace, all for his profit. I came for justice." Holmes recovered the knife, a curved Indian kris, and from Werner's pocket drew a small phial. Arsenic again. For Thorn or Mrs. Hargrove. Werner laughed bitterly. Thorn was a fool, thought himself heir to the estate. I used him as I used Graves, as I used Crow. The widow was next, then the fortune mine. Holmes examined the wagon floor. Beneath a loose board lay the missing ledger, its pages detailing Werner's payments to Thorn, Graves, and Crow. 500 here, 200 there, all in Hargrove's forged hand. "You blackmailed Sir Reginald with his opium trade, then murdered him when he refused further payment. Thorn administered the poison, you supplied it." Werner's eyes gleamed. "Prove it." Holmes produced Thorn's confession, signed in a trembling hand. "He lives to testify. And your kris bears traces of the same arsenic. Indian manufacture, rare in England. Lestrade awaits at the house." We marched Werner back across the moor, the wind at our backs. At Briar Gate the lights blazed. Lestrade himself had arrived, summoned by telegram. He listened to Holmes's report with grudging admiration, then clapped irons on the captain. "A pretty conspiracy," he said. "But the widow safe?" Holmes nodded. "For now. Yet one thread remains. The woman's footprints upon the moor, smaller than any man's. Who walked with Werner?" Lestrade scratched his head. "Eliza's sister Vera is in jail. Annie the maid?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Annie. Bring her." The girl was summoned, trembling. Under Holmes's gentle questioning, she broke quickly. "It was Mrs. Hargrove's cousin, Miss Lavinia Werner, Captain Werner's sister. She came secretly, stayed in the village inn, walked the moor to meet him. She hated Sir Reginald for cutting off her brother." Mrs. Hargrove, roused from her room, confirmed it. "Lavinia, my husband's ward years ago, she vanished after a quarrel. I thought her in France." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Telegraph the inn. She will be fleeing by the morning coach." The net closed. Lavinia Werner was taken at the coach office, a veiled figure with a portmanteau stuffed with banknotes. Her confession completed the chain. She had planted the vial in Mrs. Hargrove's room, the U upon her pillow, the forged letters to Eliza, all to drive the widow to despair that her brother might claim the estate. With the arrests, Briar Gate seemed to breathe easier. The fog lifted at dawn, revealing the moor in all its wild beauty. Mrs. Hargrove, fully recovered, joined us at breakfast. "The house is cleansed," she said softly. "Yet I shall sell it. Too many ghosts." Holmes raised his coffee cup. "To the living, madam, and to the truth which, like the moor, endures." As we boarded the train for London, the sun broke through, gilding the heather. Holmes lit his pipe, eyes half closed. "A satisfactory conclusion, Watson. Greed, revenge, and family pride, the old trinity. Yet the human heart remains the darkest continent." I watched the moor recede, its secrets buried once more beneath the heather. The game was won, but the echoes of Briar Gate would linger long in my dreams. Chapter 7. The Midnight Intruder. The London that greeted us on our return was a city transformed. A hard frost had descended overnight, glazing the pavements and turning the breath of passers-by into fleeting ghosts. Gas lamps burned with a clearer flame, and the fog that had plagued us for days had retreated to the river, leaving the streets sharp and glittering under a pale winter sun. Holmes and I alighted at Baker Street in mid-afternoon, weary but triumphant, our portmanteaus heavy with evidence. The ledgers, the arsenic phials, the forged letters, and Thorn's signed confession. Mrs. Hudson met us with hot tea and the welcome news that Inspector Lestrade had telephoned from Scotland Yard. Captain Werner and his sister Lavinia were safely lodged in cells, and the Crown prosecutor was preparing charges of murder, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Holmes, however, was not content. He paced our sitting room like a caged panther, his dressing gown trailing, pipe clenched unlit between his teeth. "The case is closed in law, Watson, but not in logic. One shadow remains. The blood in the ice house. Thorns, yes, but the bullet that wounded him was fired from a Webley service revolver. Werner carried a Chris, not a pistol. Someone else was on the moor that night." I set down my cup. A surviving accomplice? Or a new player? The game is not yet played out. He stopped before the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Tonight we return to Briar Gate. Mrs. Hargrove telegraphed this morning. Another intrusion, footprints beneath her bedroom window, a window forced but nothing taken. The local constables are baffled. Lestrade is tied up with the Werner interrogations. We go alone." We caught the 6:15 from Waterloo, the train half empty, its compartments warmed by foot warmers that hissed softly. Holmes spent the journey annotating a map of the estate, marking every path, wall, and outbuilding. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of the moor's endless heather and the glint of steel in moonlight. Sergeant Bray met us at Lower Briar Gate with a dog cart, his face ruddy with cold. "Glad you're back, gentlemen. The widow's in a rare state. Says she heard footsteps in the attic at midnight, and this morning the study safe was open again, though nothing missing." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The safe? Forced or unlocked?" "Unlocked, sir. The key was on the desk." Mrs. Hargrove received us in the drawing room, wrapped in a woolen shawl, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "I cannot stay in this house another night," she declared. "First the poison, then the arrests, and now this." I heard the attic door creak, then a thud as though someone fell. The constable searched. Nothing. Yet the safe was open, and upon my dressing table lay this. She held out a single white feather tipped with red. Holmes examined it closely. Pigeon's feather stained with fresh blood. Curious. "Madam, you will retire early with Annie in the next room and a constable at the door. Dr. Watson and I will keep watch." The house was secured as before, doors bolted, windows latched, constables posted at front and rear. Holmes stationed himself in the study, door ajar. I took the hall, revolver in hand and a whistle about my neck. The clock struck 10:11 midnight. The frost outside deepened, the windows filmed with ice. The house creaked in the cold, but no other sound disturbed the silence. At 12:30 I heard it, a faint scraping overhead directly above the study. I crept to Holmes's door and whispered the alarm. Together we ascended the main staircase, lantern shaded. The attic door at the end of the upper corridor stood ajar, a thin line of darkness beyond. Holmes pushed it open with his stick. The attic was a cavern of shadows, lit only by a skylight crusted with frost. Dust lay thick upon trunks and broken furniture. Cobwebs hung like veils. In the center of the floor lay a trap door, newly opened, revealing the black mouth of a shaft. A rope ladder dangled into the darkness. Holmes knelt, lantern raised. The old priest's hole, mentioned in the estate plans but bricked up, or so we thought. Someone has reopened it. He tested the ladder. It held. Down we go. The shaft descended 20 feet into a narrow passage, stone-walled and damp. It ran beneath the house, emerging in the cellars near the wine vaults. Holmes moved ahead, revolver drawn. At the far end, a faint light glowed, a bull's-eye lantern, its beam cutting through the gloom. A figure crouched before a small crate, prying at the lid with a jemmy. Holmes sprang. "Stand in the Queen's name!" The figure whirled, lantern swinging. I saw a masked face, a glint of steel, a knife, not a pistol. Holmes's stick cracked against the wrist. The knife clattered. I seized the intruder from behind, pinning his arms. The mask slipped, revealing a face I knew, Mr. Graves, the butler, pale and desperate, his eyes wild. "Graves!" I exclaimed. "But you are in jail." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Escaped this morning, doctor, bribed a warder with Werner's gold. I came for the last ledger, the one that names me as Sir Reginald's natural son. With it I could claim the estate, widow or no." Holmes bound him with the rope ladder. "Your father's illegitimate brother, Thorn, confessed as much. But you shot him to silence him, then returned for the proof. The blood on the feather, yours, from a cut hand." Graves sagged. "Thorn was weak. Werner promised us both a share, then betrayed us. I had to finish it." Holmes recovered the crate's contents. A final ledger bound in red morocco detailing Sir Reginald's acknowledgement of Graves as his son and a bequest of $10,000 revoked upon Graves's embezzlement. "The motive for murder," Holmes said. "You poisoned your father, framed the widow, used Werner and Thorn as tools. The priest's hole was your secret entrance." Graves nodded dully. "I watched from the moor, waited for my chance. Tonight I thought the house empty of you." Holmes signaled me. "Watson, the whistle. The constables will take him." As the sergeant's men led Graves away, dawn was breaking, the frost glittering like diamonds on the lawn. Mrs. Hargrove, roused by the commotion, listened to the tale with wondering eyes. "Then it ends," she said. "The last shadow is banished." Holmes bowed. "It ends, madam. The house is yours, cleansed of its poisons. Sell it, keep it, or burn it, as you will." We departed at noon, the sun high and the moor sparkling. In the train, Holmes lit his pipe, eyes half closed. "Another tapestry unraveled, Watson. Blood, greed, and the lust for legacy, the oldest motives of all." I watched the landscape flash by, the weight of Briar Gate lifting from my shoulders. The game was truly over, and the moor could reclaim its silence. Chapter 8. Twisted Revelations. The frost that had gilded London on our departure had melted into a raw, wet chill by the time our train pulled into Waterloo the following afternoon. The sky hung low and leaden, and the Thames steamed like a cauldron. Holmes was silent throughout the journey, his long fingers drumming upon the windowsill, his eyes fixed upon some inner vision. I knew better than to disturb him. The case of Briar Gatehouse was legally closed. Graves, Werner, Lavinia, and Thorn all in custody. The poisonings explained, the ledgers in Lestrade's hands. Yet Holmes's restlessness told me the final knot remained untied. At Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson had a fire blazing and a telegram waiting. Holmes tore it open, scanned the contents, and gave a short, sharp laugh. "Lestrade," he said. "Graves has made a full confession. Names Werner as the architect, Thorn as the poisoner, himself as the midnight intruder. But listen to this. Prisoner claims one final accomplice still at large, initial M, no further details. M. Watson, the missing piece." I poured tea. "A new player or a delusion to bargain for leniency?" Holmes paced, pipe unlit. "Graves is many things, thief, murderer, ingrate, but not imaginative. M is real, and the priest's hole. How did Graves know of it? The estate plans showed it bricked up 50 years ago. Someone within the house guided him." He stopped before the mantel, staring at the jackknife piercing the unanswered correspondence. "We return to Briar Gate tonight. Mrs. Hargrove must be warned. Pack your revolver, Watson, and the dark lantern. The moor has one more secret to yield." We caught the last train south, the carriage almost empty. Holmes spent the journey annotating the estate map with fresh symbols, crosses for intrusion, circles for hiding places. At Lower Briar Gate, the dog cart waited, driven by a silent groom. The house loomed black against a starless sky, its windows shuttered save for a single light in the hall. Mrs. Hargrove met us at the door, her face pale but composed. She had dismissed the remaining staff for the night, retaining only Annie the maid, who hovered nervously in the background. "I feared you would come," she said. "This morning a letter arrived, posted in London yesterday." She handed Holmes a single sheet of cheap paper, the ink smudged. "The game is not ended." Monsieur Holmes's eyes blazed. "The writing, disguised, but the slant is familiar. Madam, who in this house bears the initial M?" Mrs. Hargrove hesitated. "No one. The staff, Graves, Thorn, Eliza, Annie, none. My late husband's middle name was Mortimer, but—" Holmes seized upon it. "Mortimer, the family name. Show me Sir Reginald's private papers, anything retained after the police search." She led us to the study. The safe stood open, its contents catalogued and sealed, but upon a side table lay a small cedar box locked. Holmes produced his picks. The lid sprang back. Inside, a miniature portrait of a young woman, dark-eyed and solemn, and a birth certificate. Matilda Hargrove, born 1865, daughter of Reginald Mortimer Hargrove and Eliza Thorn, spinster. "Thorn's sister!" I exclaimed. "Sir Reginald's natural daughter." Mrs. Hargrove stared, speechless. Holmes turned the portrait to the light. "Matilda. M raised in secrecy, perhaps abroad. Thorn protected her. Graves knew of her. Werner used her. She is the final accomplice." A crash from the hall interrupted us. We rushed out to find Annie the maid crumpled at the foot of the stairs, a candlestick beside her, blood trickling from a cut on her temple. She stirred, moaning. "Someone in the attic," she whispered. "A woman. Black cloak. She struck me." Holmes bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. I closed behind. The attic door stood open. The trap to the priest's hole yawned. We descended into the stone passage, lanterns casting wild shadows. At the far end, in the wine cellar, a figure knelt before a crate, prying at the lid with frantic haste. "Stand, Matilda Hargrove," Holmes commanded. The woman whirled, a revolver in her hand. A Webley, the twin of Thorn's wound. For an instant, moonlight from a grating above lit her face, the dark eyes of the portrait but hardened by years of resentment. She fired. The bullet splintered stone beside Holmes's head. I returned fire, aiming low. The revolver spun from her grasp. We closed in. She fought like a tiger, nails raking, boots kicking, but Holmes pinioned her arms. "It is over, Miss Hargrove. Your father's legacy is poison, not gold." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Legacy? He abandoned my mother, sent me to a convent in Brussels, paid Thorn to keep silent. When I returned, Werner promised me justice, a share of the estate if I helped destroy the widow. I opened the priest's hole, guided Graves, planted the feather, the vial, the letters. But they betrayed me. Werner, Thorn, all of them." Holmes bound her wrists with his scarf. "And the shot at Thorn? My own. He threatened to expose me unless I paid more. I took his revolver, wounded him, left him to bleed. Then Graves escaped. I came for the last evidence, the birth certificate, to burn it and vanish." Mrs. Hargrove, who had followed with a constable, stared at the prisoner in horror. "You are my husband's child?" Matilda spat. "His shame. And yours, widow." Holmes recovered the crate's contents. The original will, naming Matilda co-heiress with Mrs. Hargrove, and a packet of letters proving Sir Reginald's bigamy. His marriage to Eliza Thorn in 1864 never dissolved. "The motive for everything," Holmes said. "Werner discovered the secret, blackmailed Sir Reginald, then murdered him when payments ceased. Matilda was the inside agent, Thorn the tool, Graves the intruder. The circle closes." The constable took Matilda away, her defiance crumbling into sobs. Mrs. Hargrove sank into a chair, the will trembling in her hand. "Then I am not the lawful heir." Holmes's voice was gentle. "You are Sir Reginald's legal wife by the later marriage. Matilda's claim is clouded by bigamy. The courts will decide, but the poisonings are ended. Dawn was breaking as we emerged from the cellar, the frost sparkling on the lawn. Holmes lit his pipe, the flame brief against the paling sky. Another tapestry of blood and gold, Watson. The human heart weaves strange patterns. Mrs. Hargrove joined us, the will folded small in her hand. I shall petition the courts to recognize Matilda's birthright, a portion at least. The house has taken enough lives. Holmes bowed. A noble resolution, madam. The moor will claim Briar Gate in time, and the heather will cover its stones. We departed at noon, the sun breaking through for the first time in days. In the train, Holmes slept, his head against the window. The map of the estate crumpled in his lap. I watched the moor recede, its secrets buried once more beneath the heather, and felt the weight of Briar Gate lift from my shoulders like a shroud. The game was truly over, and the dawn was clean. Chapter 9. The Final Pursuit. The train back to London rattled through a landscape washed clean by winter rain. Watery sunlight glinted on flooded fields, and the air that seeped through the cracked window carried the scent of wet earth and distant coal smoke. Holmes sat opposite me, the crumpled estate map smoothed upon his knee, a fresh telegraph form in his hand. He had slept little. Violet shadows lay beneath his eyes, yet his gaze was bright with the hunter's final fire. "Lestrade wires from the yard," he said, tapping the form. "Matilda Hargrove has implicated a final confederate, M.L., a solicitor's clerk named Marcus Leland, formerly in Sir Reginald's employ. Leland abstracted the original will from the firm's strong-room, forged the revocation, and posted the warning letter. He fled the yard's raid on his lodgings at dawn, last seen boarding the night mail for Dover." I leaned forward. "The Continent, then. He'll try for Calais." Holmes folded the form with a snap. "Precisely. We intercept him at the port. The Dover packet leaves at 4. We have 3 hours." We changed trains at Redhill, the connection so tight that we leapt aboard as the whistle shrieked. Holmes spent the journey in the guard's van, telegraphing ahead to the Dover Constabulary and the Admiralty Signal Station. I watched the Kentish hills roll past, the channel already visible as a dull gleam beneath the clouds. At Dover, the station was chaos. Porters shouting, steam hissing, gulls wheeling above the harbor. A sergeant in a streaming cape met us on the platform. "Mr. Holmes, Leland's been sighted, tried to buy a ticket under the name Martin. Slipped the barrier when the clerk grew suspicious. Headed for the East Pier, says he has a fishing smack waiting." Holmes's eyes blazed. "The tide turns at 3:30. We have 20 minutes. Your men?" "2 on the pier, 2 at the harbor mouth. The smack's the Sea Witch, black hull, red sail." We ran. The East Pier jutted into a restless sea, gray waves slapping against barnacled piles. Salt spray stung our faces, the wind tore at our coats. Halfway along, a knot of dockers parted to reveal Leland, small, rat-faced, a carpet bag clutched to his chest. He saw us and bolted, weaving between crates and coils of rope. Holmes sprinted ahead, long legs eating the distance. I followed, revolver drawn, shouting for him to halt. Leland reached the end of the pier where the Sea Witch lay alongside, her crew casting off. He leapt the gap, landed sprawling on the deck. The smack's bow swung free. Holmes did not hesitate. He vaulted the rail, landed cat-like beside Leland, and pinned him with a knee to the chest. The crew froze, cutlasses half drawn. I covered them from the pier. "Queen's warrant," Holmes barked, flashing a paper. "Marcus Leland, you are under arrest for conspiracy to murder, forgery, and theft." Leland struggled, eyes wild. "You'll never prove it. The will was legal." Holmes wrenched the carpetbag free. Inside, the original Hargrove will, a packet of bearer bonds and a sealed envelope addressed to a Paris bank. "Proof enough," he said grimly. "And your confession to Matilda seals the rope." The Dover constables swarmed aboard, irons clinking. Leland was hauled ashore, still protesting. The Sea Witch's crew, paid in advance, melted into the crowd. The packet for Calais steamed past the harbor mouth, her paddles churning white, passengers oblivious to the drama on the pier. Back at the police station, Leland broke quickly under Holmes's quiet, questioning. He had been Sir Reginald's confidential clerk for 15 years, privy to every secret. The opium ledgers, the bigamous marriage, the bequest to Matilda. When Werner approached him with a scheme to ruin the widow and claim the estate, Leland saw his chance at riches. He forged the revocation, planted evidence, posted the final warning. Flight to France was to be his reward. Matilda promised me half, he whined. Werner was to take the rest. We would have been in Paris by morning. Holmes's smile was wintry. Instead, you will see the Old Bailey by spring. The gallows await conspirators. We telegraphed Lestrade from the station. Leland secured. Full confession. Return tonight. The reply came swift. Excellent. Widow safe. Case closed. The evening train north was quiet, the carriage warmed by a glowing stove. Holmes lit his pipe, the flame brief against the darkening window. The circle is complete, Watson. From the veiled widow in Baker Street to the fugitive on Dover Pier, every thread accounted for. Greed, betrayal, the poison of illegitimate blood. The old story. I watched the lights of Canterbury slide past. And Mrs. Hargrove? What becomes of her? Holmes exhaled a thin blue cloud. She petitions the courts to honor Matilda's birthright, a modest annuity perhaps in exchange for silence. The estate remains hers, the house to be sold. Briar Gate will pass to strangers, its ghosts laid at last. He leaned back, eyes half closed. There is a moral, Watson, though you will call it sentimental. The sins of the father are visited upon the children, but truth is the only antidote. Without it, the poison spreads. At Waterloo, we took a cab through streets slick with rain. Baker Street welcomed us with the glow of home. Mrs. Hudson had kept supper, cold roast beef, pickles, a bottle of claret. We ate in silence, the fire crackling, the clock ticking toward midnight. Holmes raised his glass. To the moor, Watson, and to the light that scatters its shadows. I drank, the wine rich on my tongue. Outside, the rain had ceased. A thin moon silvered the rooftops. The case of the sinister widow was ended, its final fugitive snared, its secrets dragged into the open. Tomorrow the newspapers would trumpet the tale. Tonight, two tired men savored the quiet victory of justice done. And somewhere across the dark countryside, Briar Gatehouse stood empty at last, its windows blind, the heather creeping closer to reclaim what was always the moors. Chapter 10. The Unveiling. The morning of the 3rd of November dawned crisp and golden, the first true winter sun in weeks. London lay washed clean, the sky a pale, cloudless blue, the leaves of the plane trees in Baker Street drifting down like burnished coins. Holmes and I breakfasted late, eggs, bacon, toast, and strong coffee, while the newspapers lay folded beside our plates. The Times carried the headline, Briar Gate Conspiracy Unmasked, Sherlock, Holmes exposes poison ring. The Daily Telegraph was more lurid. Widow's revenge, illegitimate heir, butler, and soldier in dock. Lestrade had given the press just enough to satisfy them, withholding the finer threads that only Holmes could weave. Holmes glanced at the headlines, then pushed the papers aside. Journalists, he murmured. They see the tapestry, but never the loom. Still, the public is content, and Mrs. Hargrove is safe. That is enough. A knock at the door announced a boy with a telegram. Holmes tore it open, arriving Baker Street 11 a.m. with final documents. Grateful beyond words. E.H. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, punctual as ever. Watson the decanter, Mrs. Hudson's best port. We shall receive our client in style. She arrived at the stroke of 11, veiled once more in black, but the veil was lighter. The morning softened to half-morning gray. Her step was firm, her eyes bright with relief. She carried a small morocco case. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, voice steady. "I come to settle accounts and to thank you. The nightmare is ended." Holmes waved her to the basket chair. "Accounts first, madam. Your retainer covered expenses. The balance is yours." He slid the unopened envelope across the table. She smiled faintly. "Keep it for your next client in distress. I have brought something better." She opened the case. Within lay the original Hargrove will, the birth certificate of Matilda, and a single sheet of heavy cream paper sealed with wax. "The courts have ruled. Matilda receives an annuity of $500 secured upon the estate. The house is sold to a railway company for a sanatorium. I retain the remainder, enough to live quietly in Devon. And this," she broke the seal, "is for you." Holmes unfolded the paper. It was a letter in Sir Reginald's hand, dated a week before his death. "To Sherlock Holmes, should fate bring him to Briar Gate. The poison is closer than you think. Trust no one within these walls. The past devours the present. RMH." Holmes's eyes widened. "He suspected. Yet he said nothing to you." Mrs. Hargrove shook her head. "He grew secretive in his final months. Locked doors, burned letters. I thought it business, now I know it was fear." Holmes folded the letter carefully. A final deduction from beyond the grave. The chain began with his own sins: bigamy, opium, illegitimate children. He built the cage, and the beasts within devoured him. She rose. "I leave for Devon tomorrow. The Moor will forget Briar Gate. I shall try to do the same. You gave me back my life, Mr. Holmes. God bless you." Holmes bowed. "And you, madam, have given us a tale for the fire. Dr. Watson will chronicle it, suitably disguised, of course." The door closed behind her. Holmes stood long at the window, watching the hansom disappear into the stream of traffic. Then he turned, a rare softness in his gaze. "Well, Watson, the final chapter. Shall we assemble the players one last time for clarity's sake?" I took up my notebook. "From the beginning? From the veiled visitor. Let the record be complete." Holmes paced, pipe alight, the words flowing like a well-rehearsed soliloquy. "It began with arsenic in the port, administered by Thorn the gardener, Sir Reginald's illegitimate brother, acting on instructions from Captain Werner, the disgraced soldier. Werner had blackmailed Sir Reginald over the opium trade and the bigamous marriage to Eliza Thorn, Matilda's mother. When payments ceased, Werner planned murder. Graves, the butler, another natural son, tampered with the decanter, believing he would inherit. Leland, the clerk, forged the will's revocation. Lavinia Werner planted evidence to frame the widow. Matilda, the secret daughter, opened the priest's hole and guided the midnight intrusions. Eliza, the maid, carried innocent letters. Silas Crowe watched from the moor, seeking ledgers to ruin the trade. Each believed himself the master, each was a pawn. The footprints, the blood, the yew, the vial, the feather. All misdirection to terrorize Mrs. Hargrove into flight or madness. The true motive, to void the legal will and claim the estate through forged documents and murder. I closed the notebook. And the moral? Holmes smiled grimly. That the past is a poison more deadly than arsenic. Secrets fester. Truth is the only antidote. Sir Reginald sowed illegitimacy and greed. He reaped death. His widow, innocent, survived by courage and our intervention. He poured 2 glasses of port. To Mrs. Hargrove, and to the moor, which buries all, I raised my glass. To the unveiling. Outside, a church bell tolled noon. The fire crackled. The pipes of Baker Street hummed with the business of the day. The case of the sinister widow was sealed, its final revelation complete. In years to come, when the heather had swallowed Briar Gate's stones and the sanatorium rose upon its ruins, the tale would live on, whispered over coffee, chronicled in my strands, a testament to the genius who saw through fog and frost to the heart of darkness. Holmes returned to his chair, violin in hand. The first notes of a slow, mournful air filled the room. The last rose of summer, perhaps, or something of his own composition. I watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling and knew that for all the shadows we had chased, the light of truth had prevailed. The game was ended. The moor was silent. And in the quiet heart of London, two friends savored the rarest victory, justice pure and unalloyed, or